Hello, this is Rick again, and I'm sorry it's been a couple of weeks since I spoke to you. I think I mentioned that my wife and I went on a cruise to Europe. I hadn't realized when I set up the cruise that it fell on the 4th of July. That kind of explains why I'm wearing this peachy keen outfit. I bought this shirt because I wanted to have it when we went on the cruise so we could celebrate our country's 250th anniversary, but it didn't come in time. But while we were out, most of the people on the ship actually were Americans, and we did celebrate. We were actually, our ship, I should say our boat, it was a river cruise, was off the coast of a German town, and they were celebrating something totally different, but they did have fireworks, so we just said, okay, we're going to treat this as the 4th of July. So I was able to celebrate it. But anyway, even though this is kind of a religious broadcast, I also, as I've said, I speak of different things. I believe in people being well-rounded. So I speak of history as well. So I'm going to devote this episode to talking about our country, America. And the next episode will be on Adam and Eve. And also one of my prior Sunday school students had emailed me about some questions she had, and I answered her directly, but I thought her comments or her questions were interesting, so I'm going to go through those as well. Not this time, probably. I don't think I'll have enough time, but I'll probably do that on my next podcast. Okay. I love my country. Sometimes that's not a popular thing to say these days, which I don't understand. I'm not saying our country is perfect. And if you look at its history, it's made some very bad mistakes. It's all not perfect because human beings were involved. And whenever human beings are involved, mistakes are made. But let me just mention a couple of things people talk about when they're speaking against our country, and they're valid. It's about basically two groups of people: the Native Americans, and how they were treated. And like I said, it is valid, but it should be put into context of history. Historically, when a more technologically advanced people come to another country, there are issues. If the people who were in that country were more primitive. And the Native Americans actually discovered America, not Columbus. And I know that Columbus called them Indians because he was really not that impressed of a character, and he thought he was in a different country. That's why he called them that. But he wasn't the first one there. And it's believed that the Native Americans originally came from Russia. Of course, it wasn't Russia back then. This was many thousands of years ago. But Alaska, which has islands right now, those islands were actually a land bridge from Russia to Alaska. So that people came down through there and came down, basically, those people also became Eskimos. And then people came down further, and they were the Native Americans of Canada. And then they came to what we know today as America. And others continued on down to South America. So that's how they first came here. And I believe the Vikings came before Columbus as well, although they weren't really good record keepers, but there's been evidence that they didn't discover America because the Native Americans were already here, but they were before Columbus. So just to get the record straight. So basically the Native Americans were here, and people like to say we stole their land. It's all up to interpretation. Actually, the Indians were broken up into many tribes. It wasn't like one Indian nation. And they didn't really believe in land ownership the way that we do. They basically moved from place to place where the food was. And because they didn't stay in one area, they didn't really believe in land ownership. I think in Manhattan, some Westerners bought that island from the Indians for some trinkets. I'm sure those Indians just wanted those trinkets. But anyway, that doesn't justify what happened to the Indians. I'm just trying to uh, set the scene. So basically, the Europeans came to America and they started to settle on the East Coast. They got along well with some Indians, not so well with others. I'm sorry, I use the word Indians, Native Americans. And long story short, it just pushed the Native Americans farther and farther west. And in the beginning, America is huge, so that wasn't, they were going from one good place to another good place, basically. But as time went by, more and more Westerners came here, and they were driven off what they considered good land. And treaties were later made, I think, with good intentions, so that to kind of protect the Indians, give them certain areas. And those original reservations were good lands. I believe they're called the Black Hills. Don't quote me. But then gold was found on those lands, and greedy people came in, greedy Westerners, and they came in and chased them out. And basically, they were treated very badly. They were forced, in the end, they were forced on reservations. There's something called the Trail of Tears, where they were forced to march, I believe it was from Florida, to their reservation in mid-America, to land that wasn't good. It was more desert-like. And they were forced to become farmers, and Indians never were farmers. So it's a very, very bad history, and many Indians were killed. Massacres occurred. There was one called the Sand Creek Massacre, where soldiers massacred a village, and they killed old men, women, and children, and did atrocities. To be fair, there were records of Indians doing the same things to white settlers. So it was just a bad situation. And our government did not treat them well. And those people who bring that up as a mistake or as something that was bad about America, I agree that Native American people were not treated well. Okay, so that's one. The other, of course, is slavery. And I'm not going to get into all the details, but everyone knows what occurred. I'll just mention a few things. People forget that basically the Civil War occurred because of slavery. They don't forget that. Even though states' rights are always mentioned by those people speaking of the South, but it was really the rights to keep slaves. It was all about slavery. And 600,000 men died during that war. Half of those, so around 300,000, were wearing American uniforms and were basically fighting to end slavery, and they lost their lives to do it. And these were all white men. There were some blacks who later joined the fight as well. But the great majority were white men that died to end slavery. And I think that needs to be remembered. And we did. Unfortunately, it was a very bloody way to end it, but we did end it. And unfortunately, President Lincoln was assassinated. And what occurred after the Civil War, where there was a lot of racism and a lot of hatred toward the blacks, I think Lincoln might have been able to do something about that. Unfortunately, his vice president was not a very impressive character, and he didn't do that well. So there's a lot of reason for black folks in America to be angry because of slavery. And there's no justification of it. Even though it was occurring all over the world, it wasn't an American invention. As a matter of fact, in Africa, there was slavery where blacks owned blacks. But it was all over the world. And the Civil War is how we ended it. England, for example, ended it by paying the slaveholders for their slaves. So actually rewarding the slaveholders. So even though ours was more bloody, in a way there was a little more justice to it. Blacks were just freed. And again, black folks have every reason to be upset of how they were treated. Lincoln actually wanted to create a new country. I believe it was somewhere in South America, and give black folks the option of starting their own country, because he thought the hatred between the blacks and whites would be so great. But he got the black leaders in a room and told them his plan, and all of them were against it. They said, "This is our country too." Sorry, I get a little emotional. We bled for it. We sweated for it. Our people died for it. And the riches that this country has brought is a big part of our efforts. And this is our country. I'm sorry. So they decided to stay. And they were persecuted. And it was wrong. Okay. I just want to get that off my chest. So, the rest of the time I'm going to talk about how America was created and what this country is about. We know we had a revolution. And the call that was made was taxation without representation. To be honest with you, I think we just wanted to be our own country. I really don't think the British were persecuting us that much. I think that was exaggerated. As a matter of fact, there were a lot of taxes at one point, and we had an excellent representative in England, a guy called Ben Franklin, who spoke for us. And basically, most, if not all, the taxes were dropped except for the tea tax. And the English had an argument. They basically said, well, we're also there to protect you. During the French and Indian War, we sent our soldiers there to protect you from the French and the Indians. And we should be reimbursed for some of that. And they have a point. Being English citizens had its advantages. And so I really don't think it was a tax issue. It was really more of, we felt like we were our own country. We wanted to be our own country. We were more populated than England. We obviously had much more potential. And we just wanted, and we had what we would call liberals, I guess now. We had a lot of men who had some new ideas about how government should be formed. So that's why the revolution occurred. And now I want to talk about some of those ideas. Oh, first of all, the revolution. I try to avoid saying that men are great. I prefer to say there are good men and bad men. And there are some good men who do great things. So let me just mention, George Washington was the general in charge, and he was ultimately responsible for us winning the revolution. And no one thought it could occur. And I'm sorry, but I don't think he was a great general. He was okay, but he was actually involved in the French Indian War as a colonel, I believe. And he was actually involved in starting that war through failures of his own. And in the revolution, he had a kind of a checkered history of success. His biggest success was Trenton, where basically we attacked a English installation, although most of them were German mercenaries, I believe. And it was around Christmas time, and they'd all been out drinking all night. So when we attacked in the morning, they all had hangovers and were in no condition to fight us. And that's one of the reasons why we were successful. But I'll give George credit. He won that battle, and he won others. A big reason why we won the revolution, and to be honest, was the French. The French assisted us. I'm not sure we would have won the revolution without them. But anyway, okay, so we won the revolution. And then our founders got together. And yes, I will mention that some of our founders were slaveholders. Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, among others. But they were brave men. Basically, they created the Declaration of Independence, which was a document sent to England basically saying, you could call it a document of treason, basically saying we no longer consider ourselves English citizens and we're starting our own country. And they all signed it. They said, we're committing treason And if you need to find us, here we are. And they signed all their names. And John Hancock, of course, signed it bigger than anybody because he said he wanted King George to be able to read it without his eyeglasses. And if we would have lost the revolution, I wouldn't be surprised if all of those men had been hanged. There was a saying, I think it was from Ben Franklin, that we either hang together or we'll hang separately. And that's what he's talking about. So these slaveholders in particular are very wealthy men, and they had a whole lot to lose, including their lives. But they did it anyway because they believed in the cause. And even though Thomas Jefferson spoke against slavery and put in the Declaration of Independence that slavery was an evil, and I believe probably would have liked to have ended it if it ended it for everyone. He wasn't going to just release his slaves while there were other farmers competing with him and had slaves. And I'm not saying that's right. I'm just saying that's probably the situation. Now, there were other founders like John Adams who didn't hold slaves and wanted slavery ended when this country started. And there were many in the North that felt that way. But since many in the South, including George, Tom Jefferson, and other Southerners who had slaves, would not have agreed to fight the revolution and form a new country if that was a condition, they had to just basically bide their time. And I always say that we basically made a promise when we created the Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal. And we were hypocrites because we weren't releasing the slaves. But we made that promise. And another 70 years went by before we made that promise good. And it had to be a bloody way to do it, unfortunately. So anyway, our founders got together, and their big thing was they didn't want another king. There were mostly monarchies around the world, kings, emperors, queens. They knew human beings were flawed, and they didn't want one leader. So basically, they wanted a way for the people to be in charge. So they created a constitution, as we know, and they went back and forth and made many compromises about it. Right now, the end of their discussions created three branches of government. There's the executive, the legislative, and the there's the legislative and the judicial. Three branches of government. The executive are basically the president and those organizations that follow the laws and keep the government running. The main one is the military. They believed, and I think rightly so, that you need one man who can control the military in case we're attacked. If we're attacked, we don't need everyone to get together and vote on what we should do about it. It takes too much time. We need someone who can act immediately. So the president would have that ability, although he's very limited. And one of the ways he's limited is money. The legislative branch controls the purse strings. So yes, the president can take action, but sooner or later he's going to run out of money where any kind of war is concerned. It was interesting. We had one president, Teddy Roosevelt, who found a way around that. He created or built this great fleet. He called it the Great White Fleet. And he wanted to sail it around the world to show everyone how powerful we were. And Congress said, no, we're not going to pay for it. So what Teddy did, he sailed the fleet halfway around the world where he ran out of gas or fuel. And then he told Congress, okay, do you want the fleet back or not? So then they were forced to ante up the money to bring it back. So presidents do find a way around that. There's executive orders, which I think have become too powerful, where a president can make a temporary law and it'll exist until Congress revokes it or another president comes in and reverses it. So that was a small power in the beginning and it's become a greater one. Okay, anyway, enough about executive branch. Legislative. So, as we know, the president is elected. We all vote for him. The legislative, there is two houses. And the reason for that is a compromise. When the founders were getting together, they said, we want representatives to go to Washington to represent us, because a true democracy does not really work in a large country. In ancient Greece, they had a true democracy. It was just a city-state, basically a city. And they would bring everybody into a coliseum or a stadium and have them vote on everything, which isn't very practical, especially if you're in a big country. So we wanted a representative government, a representative democracy, where we vote for representatives and they go to Washington and they vote on what actions to take, what laws to create, because it would just be too difficult for regular people to vote on everything, as well as just being too slow. Okay, so they decided to do that, but there were some people that said, well, we should pick representatives according to population. In other words, there's a state like New York has a lot of people, so they're going to get more representatives. So New York definitely wants to go by population. They'll get more votes. But a state like Rhode Island has very few. They might just have one representative because their population is so small. So Rhode Island and others, they said, this isn't fair. You're getting more votes than we are. And a compromise was, okay, we'll create another house. We'll call it the Senate. The first house is the House of Representatives. The second house will be the Senate. And everyone will contribute 2 representatives, every state. So Rhode Island will contribute 2, and New York will contribute 2. So basically, this compromise settled that argument. Now, New York, they made the argument, well, Rhode Island, it's such a small state, somebody might live there, and the senator might live across the street from them. They go over and talk to them and have more influence. And basically, it was stated that is a disadvantage to the way the Senate is done. But you have an advantage because you have more representatives for population in the House of Representatives. So this compromise balanced things out. By the way, the Electoral College is done the same way. The argument was made we should just go by a popular vote. But then a state which has more people would have the advantage, like New York, and today New York and California, because they have more people. So it was decided that there would be an electoral college where there'd be a certain amount of electors in each state, so that one state wouldn't have greater control than the other states. And it's still done today, and I think it's fair. Now, there are those who want to get rid of it because their guy or woman won the popular vote but lost in the electoral college. But when the reverse is true, they argue the other way. So I still think this is the fairest way to go about it. Okay, so we have the executive with the president, and then we have the legislative with the 2 branches. The president is elected every 4 years, and he can serve 2 terms. That's how it is today. It didn't used to be. The senators and the congressmen, the Congress people from the House of Representatives, have 2-year terms, and the Senate has 6-year terms. And they have no term limits, which I feel they should. But unfortunately, they'd have to vote to agree to it, and they're never going to vote to agree to let their job end. So I don't think that's really going to happen. But basically, that's an advantage that they have. Now, I want to mention that, and I said this, that the president has 2 terms. He can't serve more than 2 terms. And the reason for that is, during World War II, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was our president, and he was on his 4th term when he passed away. And it was decided that they needed to put a limit because he was very sickly toward the end and really shouldn't have been in office. Some people may disagree with that, but that's how Congress felt. So they voted for 2 terms, and that's the way it's gone ever since. So that was right after he died, so I believe it was in the late 40s. I don't know the exact date. Okay, and then the final branch is the judicial, judges. Basically, what judges are supposed to do is look at the laws and look at the Constitution and make their decisions accordingly. We have had some problems with judges who want to insert their own opinions and try to make laws themselves. They basically say, I'm interpreting the Constitution or the law like this, but they're putting forth their own agenda. And unfortunately, that is a failure of the judiciary. And I hope someday we'll find a way around that. I think the best way is just to strictly follow the Constitution and strictly follow the laws that have been enacted. And if the judge isn't happy with the current laws, they should leave it to the legislature to come up with a new one. That's their job. So anyway, we have levels of courts. The judicial is judges, as I've mentioned. You have your lower court, where you get a traffic ticket and you want to fight it, you go to a lower court, or even charges like burglary or even murder would go to a lower court. And if it's found against you, for example, and you disagree, you can go to an appeals court, which they have these courts, state and federal. So you go to the appeals court and then you try it there. If it's federal, you can go to the Supreme Court, and that's the highest court in the land. And there's 9 members. And basically, they choose which cases they're going to take. If they think the case is constitutional, the decision was constitutional and there were no errors made, they can just say, we're not going to deal with that. But if they do take the case up, the 9 judges hear the case and they make a decision. And they're supposed to be following the Constitution. That's their big thing, whether it's constitutional or not. Most do, some don't. Right now, we have a majority of conservative judges that strictly follow the Constitution. And that may not last. It goes back and forth. And we have had history in the past where there haven't been 9. There's been different numbers. So technically, the numbers could change. Franklin Delano Roosevelt tried to increase the numbers to help his New Deal policies, which the judges were going against. And Congress wouldn't let him do it. And that's a fear that if someone in power, one of the parties, allows more judges, they can pick judges that'll follow their point of view, which is very dangerous. But right now, that isn't the case. Now, what do I have? I have 2 minutes to wrap things up and say how wonderful our country is. Well, our country is wonderful because we have no dictator. If you're unhappy with the people in office, you can fire them. You have the power with your vote. And also, our country is great because it's capitalistic. There's some people in the world that are born poor, and because of their country they're in, they're going to stay poor because that's where they were born. But in America, you can have empty pockets, and many immigrants have come here with no money and became millionaires, and now billionaires, and now we have a trillionaire. Because this country awards merit. It doesn't matter who your parents were. There is no royalty in America. It's how hard you work, and if you have a good idea, how persistent you are. And that's why everyone wants to come here. And people who badmouth America, who live in America, most of them, whether it's Rosie O'Donnell, I won't get into that. Most of them don't go anywhere. They stay right here to complain. And then there are people that come to America and become wealthy, and they complain too. But we have freedom of speech in this country, and we allow that. Again, I didn't mention that. We have freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion. There's a big reasons why people came to this country and came to this land and started this country. Because we wanted those freedoms. We didn't want a king or any form of government to tell us what we could think or what we could say. So I love my country. Not for everything it's done, but for everything it's tried to do and for everything it's been successful at. And it's the great hope for most of the world. I'm getting emotional again. So, happy birthday, America. I hope you have many, many more. And I thank you very much for listening to me today. And I hope you appreciate the blessing that you have in living and being born in this country, or just becoming an American citizen. My wife's in the process of doing that. She was from China. And have a great day in this great country. Goodbye now.